Age of Exploration. It's also known as the Age of Discovery. So this all started off with Christopher Columbus, who smash, bang. We talked about before, and his 4 trips to what became known as the New World, because everything he was finding was brand new. Actually, that's a name that a guy by the name of Vasco da Gama came up with. He was able to bounce down. He was a Portuguese explorer. He was able to bounce down the coast of Brazil and figure out that the travelogues from Asia were not matching up with the flora and fauna and the people that he was meeting in Brazil. So that's why they ended up calling it the New World. Anyway, the Age of Exploration was really kicked off by Columbus when he sailed the ocean blue in 1492. Cabot came up here, and he was looking for a Northwest Passage, which didn't exist at this time. We were just at the beginnings of the Little Ice Age, so all of this was snow-packed and glaciated. Vasco da Gama, he came down here, rounded the southern tip of Africa, and went up into India here. And Magellan, he's another big name. He came all the way around, or went this way. He went west, went all the way around the world. He actually didn't make it around the world, but his crew did. Balboa, another guy, first European to dive into the Pacific Ocean. He came down this way, whereas Columbus on his 4th voyage touched base here in Panama, talked to the natives, and they told him that there was another ocean just a couple days walk. He said, "Yep, that's great, thanks a lot," and he went home. He didn't bother walking over the mountains to see what was on the other side, but Balboa did. All right, some of the technology that made all of this happen prior to all of this going on, the ships were really small. This is called the caravel down here in the corner, and it combined sort of the bigger, heavier boats of the North Seas trading with the sails of the Mediterranean traders. Here's a compass. This one also has a solar thing. It's to tell the time. Can't remember the name right now. It's called a cross rudder or a cross staff. It's basically just a couple of sticks together. I don't know how to use this thing, but they would point it at a star in the morning and then sail towards that star. And then at night, they just keep heading in that general direction. And then in the morning, they'd find that star in the same spot again and sail towards that. That's how they were able to sail across the 31st latitude and end up in St. Augustine, Florida. Oh, something else. Stern-mounted rudder is a pretty big invention here. It hooks onto the ship in the same manner as a gate hooks on, a modern gate hooks onto a fence. It's got kind of a pintle system where it's got a ring, and then a hook comes in and sits in that ring, allowing it to twist and turn around. All right, so all of this was really kicked off because of the spice trade. Man, you can't see that. So the spice trade, you had the Spice Islands over in here, and that's where a whole bunch of different spices grew. The Arab traders, they kept this a secret. They told fantastical tales about monsters and sea monsters and dragons, and everything's over there hiding so that nobody would go looking for it. Marco Polo, 1271, took him like 24 years or something. He came overland this way. This is pretty much the route he took. He came overland, walked overland, became an ambassador for the emperor, and then he went home this way along the sea route home, and then up through here. Well, what happened in 1453, the Ottoman Empire, these are the Turks, They live kind of up in this region, and they were able to take over the Byzantine Empire. Remember, Byzantine was just Eastern Rome. It was the Eastern Roman Empire. Rome had split under Constantine, formed Constantinople. That became the Byzantine Empire. When the Ottomans took it over, they cut off this trade route through here. That happened in 1453. So that really spurred the Europeans to start looking for other routes to get over here into the Spice Islands and get some of those spices. Because once the Ottomans cut that off, the Arab traders were coming up here into Egypt along the Red Sea area and just charging way too much. So the Europeans wanted some of that. This is Northern Africa. This is the Red Sea. Here's Egypt here. These are Northern African trading routes, mostly for salt, as well as some slaves. But those are trade routes overland in Africa. Chinese voyages around the same time, a little bit prior. These were the main treasure voyages. The emperor, he wanted to flex his muscles a bit. He built these big giant fleets, big giant boats. Some of them were 100-ton boats, bigger than anything the Europeans were putting out. And they traveled along these trade routes here and then bounced around in the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. They didn't really do anything. They were just flexing their muscles. It was a show of power is what it was. They threw a bunch of money around. They got some ambassadors, took them back to meet the emperor. But when that emperor died, all those fleets came right back. They never capitalized on that exploration. China just kind of shrunk back into itself afterwards. So the Mediterranean trade, these guys, this is Italy, the country that looks like a boot, right? It's Italy, Greece, Turkey-ish. Italy at the time, it wasn't a unified country. It was a bunch of city-states that existed. Genoa and Venice, they kind of controlled all the trade through here. They were seagoers, big ports here. Venice is still underwater today. Those are the ones that you see with the little canals and the little tiny boats, and they row around with a stick and stuff like that. But they controlled all the trade. And when the Ottomans cut off that overland route through there, they resorted to local trade along the Mediterranean here. And then up in here, this is Britain, France. But they lost those big spice routes. And because they're seafarers, a lot of the explorers ended up being Italian, Genoan, Venetian, who went to work for other countries, other kings. All right, so for those of you who remember Earth Science last year, and you remember the gyres, right, the big ocean currents that circle our oceans, these come into play quite a bit. Now, since about the 1450s, the Portuguese, they'd been traveling down here, but nobody had ever rounded the Horn of Africa or come around here on Africa. Reason being is you can see these currents through the equator, a few degrees north and south of that equator. They're really going nowhere. There's not a lot of winds. It's called the doldrums. And they kind of just get hung up in there. And they get stuck. So until the Portuguese were able to come down in here, nobody really knew if they'd ever be able to get back. They didn't know what was down here. They also didn't know if they'd be able to get back. So these currents come into play, especially these up here. So the Portuguese explorations, it's really kicked off by Prince Henry the Navigator. He was a prince, wanted to make a name for himself. He really modernized the sea capabilities of Portugal. You got those those caravels. He got these, started manufacturing those. He set up institutions of science and math and sailing, navigation, map making, geography, astronomy. He set up institutions. Remember Columbus, from the lesson on Columbus, he got shipwrecked off of Portugal. ended up floating into Portugal on a piece of wood, piece of driftwood from that shipwreck, and went to university. Just signed right up. They sailed down here, down the Gold Coast, what's called the Gold Coast. It's where they picked up gold, and then the Ivory Coast, where they pick up ivory. And it wasn't until Vasco da Gama, this isn't exactly his route, but it wasn't until Vasco da Gama was able to come all the way around here, the Cape of Good Hope, and then up here into India, that anybody could make a direct sailing route Europe into the Indies, into the Spice Islands. That happened in 1498. So that's about 6 years after Columbus made his trip. But the Portuguese have been doing, again, since the 1450s, they've been inching their way down this way. So they kind of had their own thing going on. That's why the Portuguese rejected Columbus. They thought it would be easier to come this way. So again, 1492, Columbus sails Ocean Blue, comes across here. And then after Columbus sets up camp, after he gets all of these, by the time of his fourth, or a little after his fourth voyage, where he comes in here into Panama, there are Spanish colonies set up all over the place by the 1520s. Balboa comes down here 1513. He comes across here, lands, where Columbus just took the natives' word for it and said, okay, yeah, there's another ocean, a couple days walk. Balboa, he actually wanted to see it. He wanted to go over there and look. So he went over there, first European to sight the Pacific Ocean, first European to dive right in. And he just jumped in there. By 1519, Panama on the Pacific side, the city of Panama, it's being founded. And the reason Panama got founded is because by 1519, this is 6 years later, there are Spanish colonies all up and down here, and the conquistadors they don't have any room to move. So they just jumped onto the other side and shot up another one. In 1521, Magellan, he landed in the Philippines, and he staked that claim for Spain. That's how Spain ended up with the Philippines as well. So Mare Clausum, which means closed sea. This was a papal degree, meaning the Pope got involved in this. This was a big dispute between Spain and Portugal, because they were the big ones that were sailing all over the place. Spain had the New World, and Portugal was going this way. So this happened in 1493, and then a few more treaties came along. So the Spanish had all of this, right, and all of this, and then a little bit in here in the Philippines, and Portugal had all of this. And then here in the next one, we'll see another map here. I showed you the first one there because it's a little easier to follow. Here's Africa, here's Australia, India. All of this was Portugal. All of this, North America, South America, a little bit of Australia, and then the Philippine Islands. All of this was Spain. So the entire world was divided up by two countries, two little tiny countries. Spain here in the red, Portugal in the blue. Now it's unclaimed sea because they both lived in the North Atlantic. Both the home countries were in the North Atlantic. That was unclaimed. That's what allowed England to kind of sneak over there into North America. The Spanish weren't really doing anything with North America. There were some Basque fishermen that were going over there, but Basque at the time was considered different than Spain. All right, so again, remember these gyres, these come into play in what happens next between the Portuguese and the Spanish. So the Portuguese Indian Armada, or India Armada, 1497 to 1650. So that's about 153 years-ish, right? Remember, this is all Portugal. Portugal owns all these seas, meaning they own all those trade routes. They thought they were going to have an easier time coming here. Remember these gyres, they don't work out so well. And then the monsoon winds that come from India across the Persian Gulf into Africa, they pushed there. So what they had to do is they had to time it by season. Um, if they hit here, if they came around here before July, they could go up this way along the coast. And if they rounded down here after July, they had to hook all the way out into the Indian Ocean. So they had to carry more supplies. They didn't get any relief stations or anything like that. They had to come all the way because of those gyres, because of those winds. Also, their route coming south, once they clipped out of here, they just turned west because they were catching these currents. It would actually save them some time as opposed to trying to drive against those currents. And there's their little tiny ship there. So they would come all the way out this, and that's how Amerigo Vespucci ended up over here. One of the captains following Vasco da Gama, he swung out a little too far, and he ended up over here in Brazil. And then Amerigo Vespucci came down and explored Brazil. And that's how it ended up being called the New World. That's how America got its name, because one of the cartographers back home, or back in Spain or Portugal, said, yeah, this is a New World. Amerigo Vespucci did this, so he named all of this America. So then we hit the big Spanish treasure fleets. Remember, these are the Portuguese. They're coming this way, right? But they got to go against the current. They only have a certain window that they can go through to get around here, and that's why their ships are only sailing once a year. Spanish, however, they're going twice a year because they're able to catch these currents here. So they set sail, and it's a year long, 6 months, boom, 6 months, this guy's going, and these guys are coming back. And they had the Manila fleet as well coming out of the Philippines. And they would travel along the Pacific, follow that Pacific gyre out here. Spanish colonies, 1566 to 1790, that's roughly 230 years. So you're going on another 80 years after Portugal kind of collapsed with their Indian Armada. The New World colonies that Spain had set up were doing so well. They were incredibly productive. And they were doing so well that the Spanish colonists in the Philippines were actually Mexican born. By like 1566, this is 50 years-ish after these colonies are set up. It's another 2 generations. There's so many Mexican-born Spaniards that they're actually going across the Pacific Ocean and colonizing the Philippines. So a lot of the Filipino Hispanics are of Mexican descent, not of Spanish descent. They would use the New World as a stopover. Oops, going back. All right, so Panama and Portobello. Panama was used, it's on the Pacific side. All the gold and the fabric. Remember the Incas, they were the best weavers in the world. So the textiles, the gold, the agriculture, I keep touching it. All of that coming in out of South America, it was going up in here into Panama. There was a shipbuilding city that was set up down here in Ecuador, and all it did was build the Pacific fleet for the Spanish. That way they didn't have to sail all the way around the world. And they would take it overland, took about 4 days to hook that stuff overland, as opposed to a year-long journey coming all the way around here. So they could cut a year off of their travels just by going across there. And the same thing with the Manila fleet. They came over here, landed in Acapulco, and they had a mule train that went across Mexico into Veracruz, caught the ships in Veracruz, and then sailed right back over into Spain. Now those are the regular Spanish treasure fleets, the big armadas, the big flotillas. That didn't count all the individual merchants and stuff that were crisscrossing the ocean at this time. And that's it. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments.